Welcome to Deep Dive Conversations, where we explore what really matters. You know how it is, that exciting flash of an idea, maybe a goal that feels really important, and then, well, it just sits there, kind of like a perfectly good match that never gets struck. Today, we're lighting a fire under that very topic. We're diving into the core concepts of the Matchstick principle, a framework developed by Yeshua. This deep dive is all about understanding why just having those brilliant ideas, well, it isn't enough. And maybe more importantly, what it actually takes to get them burning. Think of it as your guide to moving beyond potential and into action.
Exactly. And we all have them, don't we? Those mental matchsticks, ideas, projects we've been meaning to start, maybe ambitions we hold dear, but we just haven't acted on them yet. What's really compelling about Yusha's perspective, I think, is that stark reminder. Potential just on its own well, it's just potential. It has zero impact, really, until we introduce that element of action.
Right.
So we'll be looking at how to overcome that initial inertia, and crucially, how to sustain the momentum once you do strike that match.
Because it's so easy to get stuck in that waiting game, isn't it? We think, oh, the timing isn't quite right, or I need to learn a bit more first, or maybe I'll start when everything lines up perfectly. But Style really kind of hits you with that pretty strong opening principle. A matchstick in your hand means nothing until you strike it.
Mm.
He basically says ideas, potential, dreams, they're useless unless acted upon. It's a blunt truth, maybe, but a necessary one. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely necessary. And the image, the unlit matchstick, it's just so resonant. It really highlights our tendency sometimes to treat the idea itself as like the accomplishment.
Yeah.
We can feel sort of satisfaction just for having conceived of something brilliant.
Yeah, just thinking it up feels good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the book really pushes back on that. It emphasizes that the match, the idea, it doesn't magically improve or become more valuable just by sitting there. It just remains an untapped possibility. Think about those moments. Maybe you've had a great idea and thought, okay, I'll get to that soon. And then weeks, maybe months, gosh, even years can pass.
Yeah.
And it's still just an idea.
Still just sitting there.
Right. And the book compels us to ask, what's the real cost of all that waiting?
It really does make you look at those stagnant projects differently. Now, Estella moves on to this concept. Fire is a reaction, not a thing.
Okay.
Okay, unpack that for us a bit. That's not how we typically think about success, is it?
That's right. It's a bit counterintuitive, maybe. We often think of success as like a destination, something tangible we achieve or possess.
Mhm.
But the book reframes it. It sees it as much more dynamic process. I mean, fire isn't a static object you can just hold, right?
Mhm.
It's a chain reaction. It needs fuel, it needs oxygen, and critically, it needs that initial spark.
Mhm.
So similarly, success isn't something you simply have. It's more like the ongoing result of your actions.
Mhm.
It's about your ability to recognize opportunities, to act on them, and importantly, your persistence through challenges.
Ah.
It's the continuous doing that leads to what we perceive as having success.
So basically, all the wishing and hoping in the world, it just won't create that fire. You have to actively create the conditions, like preparing the kindling for a real fire. And that initial action, that first step, that's the strike of the match.
Precisely. Our ideas are like that potential energy stored in the match head. It's only when we apply that initial force, that friction of action, that we actually ignite the process. And that initial spark, that small action, can then create a kind of feedback loop. Small actions can lead to small results, sure, but those results can then fuel further action, create momentum.
Yeah, right, getting things moving.
Yeah, it's all about getting that reaction started.
Okay, but here's a big one. A fear that I think a lot of us grapple with. Starting something with all this enthusiasm and then just fizzling out, burning out. The book tackles this directly, doesn't it? This fear of burning out.
Hmm.
How does Estaya suggest we shift our thinking around this?
Well, what's interesting here is the subtle, but I think important shift in focus. Instead of just trying to avoid burnout, which, let's face it, can sometimes just lead to more inaction.
Yeah, like I won't start because I might burn out.
Exactly. The book suggests we should focus instead on learning how to sustain the fire. Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
A single match, as we know, burns really quickly. It's gone in seconds. But its purpose isn't really to provide long-lasting heat on its own. Its job is to ignite something else, something with more substance.
Like the kindling or the logs.
Precisely. Think of it like the initial match might just be a small pilot light. The key then becomes feeding that small flame with more substantial fuel, more actions, more resources, more focus to create a lasting fire. So it's really about being strategic. What do we choose to ignite, and then how do we nurture it carefully?
And the book makes a really compelling point about fire being contagious too, how a small, focused effort, that one struck match, can indeed ignite something much, much larger than itself. But, like you said, the key is being deliberate, choosing what we ignite. We can't just spread ourselves too thin, right? Striking matches absolutely everywhere.
Exactly right. You just run out of matches and energy. And this leads us neatly into the next concept, the safe zone. The book argues that this feeling of safety, just holding on to the unlit match, can actually be quite dangerous.
Dangerous. How so? It feels safe.
Well, holding on to that pristine, unexecuted idea, it feels safe because, like you said, there's no immediate risk of failure. There's no possibility of criticism if you never show anyone.
Right. It's almost like we become attached to the potential itself. And we're afraid that actually trying it and maybe failing or maybe it not being perfect, that'll somehow diminish that beautiful potential in our own eyes or maybe in others.
That's it, exactly. You've nailed it. But, as the book argues really powerfully, the real risk isn't the possibility of a flame sputtering out. It's not the failed attempt. The far, far greater risk lies in never striking the match at all, never trying.
Yeah.
I mean, the world rarely remembers the brilliant ideas that just remained inside someone's head, does it?
No, you remember the things people actually did, even if they weren't perfect.
Exactly. It remembers the ideas that were brought to life. Action, even if it's imperfect action, leaves some kind of mark. Inaction leaves nothing.
And that ties directly into the idea of the cost of an unused match.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a financial cost, though it could be, but as the book emphasizes, it's a cost in terms of lost opportunity. Every time we hesitate, every excuse we make, that's a chance, a potential fire that just slips away.
Yeah, and this is where we kind of need to engage in a bit of honest self-reflection, perhaps. Think about the times maybe you've had an idea and you thought, oh, someone else will probably do that, or maybe the market isn't quite ready yet.
The justifications.
Right, and then lo and behold, maybe a few months later, someone does do it, or something very similar. Those are the lost opportunities. That's the real cost of the unlit match. And, the book reminds us pretty starkly, we don't have an infinite supply of these matches, of time, of energy, of opportunities.
That's a sobering thought. Okay, so we know inaction has a cost. But why is starting so hard? Astayo highlights that often the strike is the hardest part. Why is that? That initial friction, overcoming that internal resistance to actually begin, why does that feel like the biggest obstacle?
It often is. That initial strike, it frequently requires a disproportionate amount of mental and emotional energy compared to maintaining momentum later. It's about breaking through that inertia we talked about. It's pushing past that fear of the unknown, the fear of failure, the fear of looking silly. We can get so bogged down in planning the perfect first step, can't we?
Oh, yeah. Analysis paralysis.
Totally. We want everything figured out before we even start, which is often impossible.
Yeah.
But the book offers a really encouraging perspective here. It says, once that initial spark is there, once the match is struck, momentum often starts to take over. It becomes easier to keep it going than it was to get it started in the first place.
So it's really about overcoming that initial hurdle.
Yeah. I mean, most of the time, what really stops us isn't our inability to follow through or keep going. It's our failure to simply start, to make that first strike.
Which brings us right back to that core message so clearly stated: strike the match, then feed the fire. The match itself, the initial idea or action, it isn't intended to burn indefinitely. That's not its job. It's the catalyst, right? The initial spark that has the potential to ignite something far more significant.
Exactly. The idea, the potential, that's just the starting point. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. The real work, and frankly, the real reward, comes from taking that initial action, striking the match, and then consistently nurturing what that action ignites, feeding the fire. So maybe as we start to wrap up here, it's worth considering, maybe for you listening, what's one matchstick you've been holding on to, one idea, one goal, and perhaps what's one small strike you could realistically make today or this week?
That's a great question to leave people with. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Matchstick principle. Just a reminder, this podcast is produced by Yisha Stayo, creator, author, and our podcast producer.
Yeah, it's been a really fascinating exploration, thinking about the power of action over just potential.
Yeah.
And just remember, that first strike, it's often the hardest, yeah, but it's also the most crucial one.
Absolutely. And if you want to explore these ideas further, grab Yisha Stayo's latest book, The Matchstick Principle, on Amazon. Need coaching, writing help, or business support? Yish has your back. You can check the show notes for all the relevant links. Until next time, keep diving deep.